back to Football League World TV. It's time for another episode of The Debate, and here we're talking all things Shrewsbury Town and whether things are starting to click for the Shrews under Steve Cotterill. I'm your host, George Dagless, and joining me this morning is Marcus Ally. Marcus, how are you getting on?
Yeah, really well. Thanks, George. Good morning, all. Shrewsbury Town have been one of the sides to pull themselves out of the mire, I think, in recent months. It is shaping up to be a really interesting League One relegation battle, but the Shrews will be relieved to have maybe taken their names out of that conversation. I'm looking forward to getting into today's show.
Good stuff. We're live across Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter for the next 20 or so minutes. Shrews fans, let us know what you made of the season so far. What are you hoping for in the next few months, the campaign as well? Let's get going. Marcus, we did a debate yesterday on Mansfield Town and said that they'd had a Jekyll and Hyde season so far. Shrewsbury probably haven't, or haven't had one to the same extent, but things have certainly picked up a little bit, haven't they, since the start of the season? What have you made of their campaign so far in general?
Well, it's been up and down, as you say, even though maybe not as in such spectacular fashion as we've seen in some other clubs. Their home form has been absolutely crucial, possibly even more than any other club in League One. They ranked 9th in a table based off just results at home. However, that compared to 22nd on their travels. So they've only won one league game away from home all season. It's been a slow burner that they won just one of their last 9 league games at the back end of 2020-21, kind of struggling to capitalise on some decent runs that were able to put together, with Steve Cotterill managing to sort of gather everyone around him at the club despite being in and out of hospital. It was a really inspiring story last season. They weren't quite able to build on that momentum at the back end of last season and push themselves into maybe even top half contention. And that sort of stagnation did end up carrying over to the start of this season. They scored just one goal in the opening 6 league games. So we saw an extremely slow start that you were thinking maybe Cotterill's even under pressure, but similarly to last season, he was able to pull them out of it at a similar stage, really, just building towards the new year. But the home form has been absolutely crucial. Daniel Udo's stood out in recent months. A 25-year-old they signed from non-league has looked one of the better finishers in League One. He's not playing at a side where he's granted that many chances in any games, really. He has been feeding off scraps for large periods of the season, but has really come into his own in this positive recent run. So they're well placed going into the second half of the season. I think the expectations from Shrewsbury Town fans is kind of just gradual progress year on year, trying to stay away from any relegation fears back down to League Two. So it's probably been about par overall, although considering how they started, they'll be pleased with how they've performed over the last few months.
Why do you think? Do you think there's a particular reason, Marcus, behind that sort of drop off at the start of this season compared to the end of last year? I mean, obviously there was plenty of sort of upheaval with Cotterill in and out of hospital, like you mentioned, and I guess as well from that, what do you think in more recent months or recent weeks, perhaps, has been behind Shrewsbury's little uplift and the way they've managed to just pull away from the bottom four a little bit?
Well, Sean Goss and Rashawn Williams were quite key players in the second half of last season. Williams left for Doncaster, someone he previously worked with in Richie Wellens, and Sean Goss went to Motherwell. Two younger players that were sort of had a really successful influence on the squad in helping them pull away in the second half of last season, where that sort of compared with Ryan Bowman taking some time to adjust, taking some time to settle at the top of the pitch. He's got 6 league goals now, but he really did take some time to get going. I do think it was a bit of a hangover from the slow end to last season. Shrewsbury's been a club that's recruited and almost put defence first in recent years. So it wasn't a surprise to see them a little bit more solid than they were enterprising going forward. But just the extent of that did mean that you're going to struggle to pick up wins if you're not scoring more than one goal a game. So they made it a bit harder than it needed to be at the start of the season, but they've been able to grow in confidence. And yeah, it's one of the more tricky away days in League One at the moment.
Let's talk some of their strengths then. I guess one of the standout ones is just their defensive record. They've conceded not the fewest amount of goals in League One, but they're certainly up towards the right end, which perhaps comes as a little bit of a surprise given where they are in the overall table. but their goals against column is actually pretty positive, isn't it? So is that probably their main strength, do you think, their defensive side of things?
Definitely, yeah. They've been able to get a settled back three together in the last few months. George Nurse has come in from a more familiar left back role to play on the left side of a back three very successfully. Aaron Pierre's sort of fallen out of favour, but due to the success of the back three, I think Matthew Pennington's really coming of age this season. 27 years old, finally left Everton in the summer, joining Shrewsbury as a free agent, and I think he's probably got abilities at above League One level. He's starting to show his true ability now that he's finally settled at a club and is getting consistent selections and is able to sort of play for a club with the future in mind rather than just looking towards the end of the season or to January or something like that. Of course, Ethan Ebanks-Landell at the centre of that defensive trio is a player with a lot of experience at League One levels, been at Shrewsbury a while now, so he's in a good position to hold it all together. Luke Leahy as well has been another player that's been very dependable for the Shrews with his versatility. He's played centre mid, left wing back, left centre back. So the summer signings have kind of all started to adapt to life at New Meadow at the same time, and that has culminated in their upturn in form.
Just elsewhere on the pitch, I mean, the player we've already mentioned is Daniel Udo. He's had a pretty decent season, but all things considered, I think, given the way Shrewsbury have had poor patches of form. What do you make of his potential future, Marcus, looking ahead past this season? Is he a player Shrewsbury will feel that they can keep hold of, or potentially his future might lie elsewhere and perhaps further up the EFL?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to monitor. He's been finishing at a pretty alarming rate. 7 goals from just over 4 expected goals isn't really sustainable. But when you play in a side like Shrewsbury, who are under the cosh for large periods in games, you are going to need to be clinical. And he's been able to do that. 25 years old, given that he came out of non-league, I'd say he's probably a little bit younger than that age would suggest in terms of his EFL career. He's got a contract at New Meadow until the summer of 2023. The club do have an option to extend that by a year, so they're in a good position in that regard. It's maybe been a shock to not see any murmurs in January about a potential exit for him, given the impressive run he put together going into the new year. But yeah, he's definitely an asset for the club moving forward. They have got quite an experienced squad, but one that would possibly not have that much resale value in the transfer market. So with Shrews and their abilities in the transfer market, it would maybe be a case pushing forward of maybe cashing in on these assets and then reinvesting more smartly than maybe they have done before. And Udo does stand out in the squad, that a player that they could be able to do that with, maybe alongside Matthew Pennington. But I can't see him leaving anytime soon. I definitely see him playing for Shrewsbury next season, and hopefully he can really build on the sort of platform that he's given himself. I think he'd definitely have his eye on maybe at least 15 league goals for the season, particularly with the confidence that the side are playing with at New Meadow in particular.
I mean, Shrewsbury fans will obviously hope that he sticks around for longer than the end of this season. I mean, that kind of leads us on to perhaps one of their standout weaknesses, and that's just general goal scoring form. Only the bottom 3 in League One have scored fewer goals so far this season. So I guess whilst their defence is something that we've praised, overall their attacking is probably something they need to improve on, isn't it?
Yeah, as you say, relegation form really going forward. They're 17th for expected goals generated compared to 11th for expected goals against. So that suggests how they're performing in both boxes, a mid-table side at the back, but pushing towards that relegation zone going forward. It'll definitely be something that they'll be looking to address in January. And just moving forward, it does feel like Steve Cotterill's got quite a lot of confidence with the board, and I can see him being in the job for quite a while. They are performing as they should be, and in that you have the chance to sort of make these plans of how they're going to go about in the future. As I mentioned, they have had an identity as a bit of a defensive side in recent years, having prioritised that in their recruitment, particularly when Sam Ricketts was manager of the club. They won't want to move too far away from that and lose the defensive solidity, trying to be a little bit too expansive in attack, given that overall, despite the poor start, it has worked for them this season. But it's definitely something that they'll have an eye on. They do have a lot of attacking options at the club, despite the poor goal return. So maybe that's they'll be looking to remould that attacking contingent in the next few transfer windows. Sam Cosgrove came in on loan from Birmingham City, hasn't really had the desired impact. So possibly now they've got those solid foundations. If they can keep hold of the likes of Pennington, then they will have a base to start looking further forward in the pitch in prioritising their recruitment, because Daniel Udo and Ryan Bowman can't do it all on their own. And if one of them was maybe to suffer an injury, the gap to the relegation zone and their cushion over it is still only 3 points after Morecambe won at the weekend. So in the final week of the January transfer window, they're still definitely looking over their shoulders a bit more than they are looking up at mid-table.
I mean, I suppose one thing you have to consider with Shrewsbury is they are working one of the smaller budgets in the league as well, aren't they? So they've got to try and be a bit cleverer or a bit shrewder in the transfer market than the likes of the Sunderlands and Sheffield Wednesdays in the league that obviously have a little bit extra financial clout.
Yeah, definitely. They've been able to do that successfully in recent years. Pennington, as we mentioned, was a free agent. Elliot Bennett has been a solid performer for them. I'm sure he's got a big influence on the dressing room, playing in a right wing back role in the last few weeks. So that they'll maybe be tapping into that in the next 6 days, because the free agent market is something that they could definitely utilise to their strengths. It is an experienced side. If you look at the average age, Udo almost sticks out as a 25-year-old. They've done well in the loan market. Leshabella and Tyrese Forner coming in from Nottingham Forest, the latter this month, does help in central midfield because they are a little bit weak in terms of the depth chart in that area. So I think that could be somewhere that they could look in the next few days, just to give themselves a little bit more cover as the fixtures come thick and fast in the second half of the season. But it's not going to be a case of going out and buying Forest Green's best player or something who are top of League Two. They are going to have to be very smart and reserved. And of course, the impact of the pandemic is still showing on the financial capabilities of particularly clubs of Shrewsbury's side, and the way that they're able to operate in transfer windows.
Let's talk Steve Cotterill for a bit now. I think it's probably fair to say that among the fan base, there's a hope that he's going to do well. I think that there's a willingness to give him more time to see what he can do at Shrewsbury. Admittedly, at points earlier on in the season, it's probably fair to say that some were on his back, as always seems to be the case when results aren't going a team's way. But what have you made of the job Cotterill's done overall, Marcus? And what do you think that the general sense is amongst the fan base in terms of where he can take Shrewsbury in the short to medium term?
Overall, I've been very, very impressed with the job he's done. It was extremely difficult circumstances last season. He came into the job after 2 years and 8 months out of football, which, considering how many sackings there are and how regular that is, that's a very long time. That was after he left Birmingham City, I think it was, which is a very tough job for a variety of reasons. And to drag them out of any kind of relegation conversation last season, I think went under the radar. This season, he's been able to build on that despite some concerns at the start of the season. I think those worries have largely been addressed in the last few months. The away form is very poor, and that's something that they'll be looking to improve in the second half of the season. But overall, I've been hugely impressed with Steve Cotterill. I think it depends really where you set your expectations of Shrewsbury. They're in their 7th full season in League One consecutively now, and in those previous 6, they've finished 20th, 18th. Then you've got the anomaly 3rd place under Paul Hurst, and then back to 18th, 15th, and 17th last season. So it is really the bottom of sort of lower mid-table, the top of the relegation battling pack. So to be able to have Shrewsbury looking up, I think they're 6 points off the top half as it stands. So if they can close that gap in the next few months, then they just want to see a gradual improvement year on year. And if they can get closer to that mid-table group, I think about par is maybe sort of 3 or 4 places above the relegation zone, and Steve Cotterill has them trending in that direction. Maybe given the little cushion over the bottom 4 and the defensive solidity that they've shown, will have fans feeling a little bit more comfortable and maybe looking for them to be a little bit more adventurous on the pitch in the second half of the season. It'll be interesting to see if Cotterill does try anything like that, but I think that could depend on the personnel that they're able to bring in the next 6 days. So yeah, I've been hugely impressed. It was a bit of a surprising appointment when he came in, given the time that he'd spent out of the game. But he's clearly got all the players on side. That was shown very clearly last season, even when he was engaging in team selection on a hospital bed. So I think it's been an outstanding job so far, and definitely one where Shrewsbury fans should be optimistic about the future.
Now, I was watching, or I saw some of the highlights of the game at the weekend where they lost to Bolton, and judging by the reaction as well amongst supporters, it did seem as though there's trying to be a shift towards something a little bit more attacking. Ultimately, Shrewsbury didn't take their chances, which is perhaps a story of the season. We've touched on their lack of goals already earlier on in this show, but it does seem as though Cotterill is trying to shift from obviously trying to keep that defensive base, but trying to make Shrewsbury a little bit more expansive. But I guess, as you mentioned there, Marcus, Shrewsbury are a team that invariably finish towards the bottom half of the League One tables. They just need to be careful, don't they? They want to try and be more progressive, but they need to probably take it in slow steps.
Yeah, they need that platform to be there earlier in the season if they're to take that risk. So if say they're able to win the next 3 games, maybe get the cushion up towards the 10-point mark, they can feel a lot more safe and not be looking over their shoulders as much. And then that provides more leeway for Steve Cotterill to change the tactics a little bit. When you're only 3 points above the drop, you don't want to be changing the formula that's working, given especially how well their upturn in results has been in the last few months. So yeah, it is a risk when changing style of play, particularly in the EFL when being a stable League One club is so important for a club like Shrewsbury at the moment. So yeah, they'll be looking for, hopefully they can get to a stage where they've got maybe a couple of months left in the season. They've got nothing to worry about in terms of relegation, and they can start building towards the future. Maybe start playing some younger players. They've got an exciting player, Tom Bloxham, who scored their first goal of the season, has had limited opportunities in the last few months, but it's definitely an exciting youngster at the club. And Steve Cotterill's managed quite a lot at a championship level. He's got the experience. He knows what it takes to climb these leagues. So yeah, that would be something interesting to look out for if they can get themselves in a stable enough position to make that more of a risk-free approach.
Okay, let's get to our conclusion. So, Marcus, the topic of this debate was have things clicked at Shrewsbury Town? So what do you make of it? What's your overall feeling? I personally think that things are getting there. I don't think it's safe to say that it's job done for Steve Cotterill. Of course, it isn't. There's still plenty of work to do and things they want to work on. They obviously want to eventually be getting back towards the sharp end in League One like that season they had under Paul Hurst not too long ago. But what's your overall feeling?
It depends how you define clicking, to be honest. I think that 2017-18 season finishing third does maybe show the fans just what is possible at a club like Shrewsbury. I think the groundwork's being put in by Steve Cotterill to put them in a position to then kick on at some point. But yeah, they've still got a lot of work to do. The away form is awful. Just one win on the road all season. That's not sustainable if you want to be a club that's pushing into the top half and beyond. So know that there's still a long way to go. There's plenty to do. They do need to be a lot more enterprising and adventurous in the attacking third, because I think a lot of sides maybe do go to New Meadow or play host to Shrewsbury and think if we score one goal, we're not going to lose the game. So yeah, there is a long way to go, but I think the foundations are there. Cotterill's definitely had what we're at now, just about a year and a half in charge. I think he's definitely made a promising start, and one where Shrewsbury fans can be going into hopefully the end of this season, looking into next season and thinking that they can achieve progress year on year, and then potentially become a club that we do see overperform again and can throw their names into the playoff mix at some point in the next few years.
Okay, that's been the debate. Just time to tell you what's coming up on Football League World TV later on today. At 12 o'clock, Ned Holmes is hosting the Ipswich Town fan debate. He's joined by Phoenix Talks. At 2 o'clock, the EFL midweek preview. Alfie Burns hosting that one. He's joined by Toby Wilding, looking ahead to the EFL fixtures coming up in the next couple of days. And then the transfer zone's back at 4 p.m. Sam Rourke hosting that one. Ben Wignall and Chris Gallagher will be joining him. Marcus, thanks for joining me this morning. Great to get your thoughts on all things Shrewsbury. Just time as well to plug Football League World TV on YouTube. Do subscribe to the channel if you can, and do like this video as well. That'd be greatly appreciated. But from myself and Marcus, it's bye for now.